Every year on India's Independence Day, the Prime Minister gives a speech from the ramparts of the Red Fort in Delhi. Well, that incredible fortress, that was the home of the Mughal emperors. It's this powerful, living symbol of a dynasty that completely shaped the subcontinent, leaving a legacy you just can't ignore.
But that brings up a huge question, right? For centuries, trying to rule the Indian subcontinent with an unbelievable diversity of people and cultures was seen as, well, pretty much impossible for any length of time. So how did this family of outsiders show up, build one of the world's greatest empires, and actually hold it all together for over 200 years?
And that's the real puzzle we're going to unpack. On one hand, the Mughals achieved just staggering wealth and created a cultural footprint we still see all around us. But they did it in one of the most complex, difficult-to-govern places on the planet. To figure out how they pulled it off, we've got to start at the beginning, with where they came from. So, who were these guys? Well, the Mughals had what might be one of the most intimidating family trees in all of history, claiming they were descended from two absolute legends of conquest.
Okay, so from their mother's side, they came from the Mongol leader Genghis Khan, and from their father's side, they were the successors of Timur, who you might know as Tamerlane. Now, you'd think they would brag about both, right? But here's the twist. They didn't. They actually hated being called Mughal or Mongol because Genghis Khan's name was linked to the massacre of just countless people. So instead, they leaned really heavily into their other famous ancestors. They were incredibly proud to be descendants of Timur. And why was that? Well, because it gave them a historical claim to the throne. See, their great-great-great-grandfather Timur had actually captured Delhi way back in 1398. This wasn't just family pride, it was a brilliant political move. It meant their invasion wasn't some foreign conquest, it was them coming back to claim what was rightfully theirs. And the man who made that return happen was Babur. His story is pretty wild. He becomes a ruler at just 12 years old, gets kicked out of his home by rival Mongol groups, but after years as a wanderer, he manages to seize Kabul. And then, in 1526, he marches into India, wins a decisive victory against the Sultan of Delhi at the Battle of Panipat, and just like that, the foundation of the Mughal Empire was laid.
But look, conquering a place is one thing. Actually governing it, that's a whole different ballgame. The real genius of the Mughals was the incredible administrative machine they built. It was like an imperial operating system that let them control this huge, diverse territory. At the very heart of this system was the Mansabdar. The word basically means someone who holds a mansab, or a rank. The easiest way to think about it is like a grading system for every single noble and officer in the empire. It decided your status, your salary, and your military duties all rolled into one. So here's how it actually worked. First, every official got a rank, a number called a zat. The higher your zat, the more important you were and the more you got paid. Simple enough. Second, you had to maintain a certain number of horsemen, or sawar. And third, and this is key, you didn't get paid in cash from the treasury. Instead, you were given the rights to collect taxes from a piece of land, which brings us to our next big idea. And that land assignment was called a jagir. Now here's the really clever part. Most of these mansabdars didn't actually live on their jagirs or govern them. They might be serving hundreds of miles away. Their servants would go collect the tax money, and that money would then pay the official's salary and fund his cavalry. It was an amazing way to pay your entire government without constantly draining the central bank account. So where did all that tax money for the jagirs come from? Well, it was raised through this remarkably modern and sophisticated system called ZAT. Instead of just demanding random amounts of money, Mughal officials would conduct these super detailed 10-year surveys of crop yields, prices, and how much land was being farmed. Based on all that data, they set a predictable tax, paid in cash, for every crop. It was systematic, data-driven, and way ahead of its time. But an empire isn't just about good administration and collecting taxes. It needs a big idea to hold it all together, especially when you're a minority ruling over a vast majority of people with different beliefs. And this is where Emperor Akbar, Babur's grandson, was a true visionary. So in the 1570s, Akbar, who was this deeply curious person, started holding these regular discussions about religion. He'd bring in everyone, Muslim scholars, Hindu brahmanas, Catholic priests, Zoroastrians, and through all these debates, he had this huge epiphany that rigid religious rules and the scholars who pushed them were often just bigots, and that all their squabbling was only creating division and chaos in his empire. And that realization led him to create this incredible idea called sulhikol, which basically means universal peace. This wasn't just about, tolerating other religions. It was an active government policy that focused on a universal set of ethics, things like honesty, justice, and peace, that everybody could agree on no matter what god they prayed to. It was the ideological glue for his multi-religious empire. His own son, Emperor Jahangir, described the policy just beautifully. He said that just like God's compassion has room for everyone, so did his father's empire. He wrote that under Akbar, and I quote, "The road to intolerance was closed." I mean, what a radical vision of how to govern, especially for that time. So you've got this brilliant administrative system and this powerful idea of unity. For a long time, it worked amazingly well. But, and there's always a but, isn't there? The very systems that powered their success also held the seeds of their own destruction. Eventually, the cracks started to show. First off, there was the succession problem. See, unlike European kings where the eldest son got everything, that's primogeniture, the Mughals followed the old Timurid custom. It's called coparcenary inheritance, and it meant the empire was supposed to be divided among all the sons. In reality, what this meant was a brutal, bloody civil war between brothers almost every single time an emperor died. It was incredibly destabilizing. Problem number 2, the elite class just got too big for its britches. Now check out these numbers. During Akbar's reign, there were only 29 of the highest-ranking nobles. Fast forward about a century to Emperor Aurangzeb, and that number had exploded to 79. More nobles meant way more salaries to pay out. And that created a massive logjam. There was a shortage of jagirs, those land assignments they used to pay everyone. So nobles would have to wait for years to get their jagir, and when they finally got one, they tried to squeeze every last penny out of it as fast as they could, because who knew how long they'd have it? And of course, the people who paid the price for all this were the peasants. In this chart, wow, this really tells the whole story. It's just staggering inequality. During Shah Jahan's reign, get this, just 445 men, that's a tiny 5.6% of the nobility, controlled over 61% of the entire empire's revenue. A tiny, tiny elite was hoarding almost 2/3 of the wealth, while the whole system underneath them was starting to buckle. So, when we step back and look at the whole picture, the Mughal legacy isn't some simple story of success or failure. It's this fascinating, messy, and totally contradictory story. On one hand, they left behind an administrative blueprint that future rulers, including the British, would end up copying. They oversaw this period of unbelievable economic prosperity and artistic genius. But that existed right alongside crushing poverty and inequality. They pushed for universal peace while being in a state of almost constant war, often with themselves. In a strange way, the very success of their system is what ultimately led to its downfall. And that kind of leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. This incredible mix of massive wealth and deep poverty, of enlightened tolerance and brutal conquest, is that just the story of the Mughals? Or is that the fundamental contradiction, the paradox, that lies at the very heart of every single great empire throughout history?